Have you ever noticed how people can talk about almost anything except death, even though everyone knows it is coming? And have you ever wondered why thinking about death can either terrify you or strangely make you feel more alive? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are stepping into a subject that is both universal and deeply personal. What happens when you die? Not as a horror story, not as a cheap shock, and not as a rigid doctrine you are forced to accept. We are going to approach it the way Buddhist wisdom often does, with clarity, compassion, and practical insight. The goal is not to make you fear the unknown. The goal is to help you live with less fear, more meaning, and a steadier heart. Because even if the details of what comes next are debated across cultures, one truth is not debated: death is certain. The timing is uncertain, and the way you live is shaping the way you meet it. Let me start with a story, because the mind opens differently when it hears a human life instead of only abstract ideas. There was a man named Ray, and who never thought about death. Not because he was brave, but because he was busy. His calendar was always full: work deadlines, family obligations, social plans, constant messages, constant stimulation. If death appeared in the news, he scrolled past. If someone mentioned it, he changed the topic. He told himself he was being positive, but underneath that positivity was avoidance. A quiet superstition that if you do not look at death, death cannot look back. Then one afternoon, Ryan was on a crowded train, standing near the doors, half listening to music, half thinking about what he still had to do. The train stopped suddenly, harder than normal. People swayed. Someone dropped a bag. Nothing dramatic happened. No one was hurt. But in that moment, Ray felt a surge of fear in his body that did not match the situation. His heart raced, his throat tightened. His mind flashed a single sentence: "What if this is it?" He felt ashamed of the fear. He told himself he was overreacting. But the fear lingered, not as a panic attack, but as a new awareness that he could not unsee. Life was fragile. He could die today. Not because he was sick, not because he was reckless, just because the world is unpredictable. That night, he could not sleep. He scrolled on his phone searching for reassurance the way people do when they feel exposed. He watched videos about health, safety, survival tips, statistics. Each video promised a kind of control. None of it calmed him. Because the problem was not information. The problem was the raw reality he had been avoiding. He was going to die, and he did not know what that meant. A few days later, he heard about a talk at a community center. The speaker was not a doctor and not a preacher, just an old teacher known for speaking plainly about life and mind. Rayan went, not because he expected answers, but because he needed to breathe in a room where death was not treated like a taboo. The teacher was named Anand. He walked slowly, sat down, and looked at the audience with a calm face that suggested he had already made peace with the biggest questions. He began by saying something that surprised Rayan. He said the fear of death is often the fear of not having lived. Rayan felt that sentence hit him like a bell, because he realized he had been running, but he did not know what he was running toward. He had achievements, but he was not sure they meant anything. He had comfort, but he did not feel peace. If death came, what would he hold on to? His job title, his bank account, his social image. None of it could follow him. And spoke about death in a way that was neither sentimental nor harsh. He said there are two layers. The outer layer is biology. The body stops functioning. The inner layer is experience. The mind meets a transition it has never rehearsed consciously. And most of the suffering around death is created by the mind, not by the event itself. Then he said something even more challenging. You are rehearsing your death every day. Rayan frowned. Anand explained. The way you respond to change is the way you respond to endings. The way you react when things do not go your way is the way you react when control disappears. The way you cling to identity is the way you cling when identity dissolves. So if you want to understand death, do not only speculate about the afterlife. Study your mind right now. That was the first crack in Rayan's old relationship to death. He realized death was not only a future event, it was a teacher present in every moment of impermanence. Now let us bring in Buddhist wisdom, because it offers a framework that is both practical and deeply compassionate. Buddhism begins with a simple observation. Everything that arises is impermanent. Bodies change, feelings change, thoughts change, relationships change, societies change. Even the idea of self changes. When you resist this, you suffer. When you accept this, you can live with more freedom. In this view, death is not a punishment. It is not a cosmic insult. It is the completion of a natural process of change. The body is a temporary form, and the mind, shaped by habits, intentions, and attachments, continues in some way through causes and conditions. Different Buddhist traditions describe the details differently, and it is wise to be humble about what we cannot directly verify. But the core moral and psychological logic is consistent. Cause and effect matters. Intention matters. Training the mind matters. Because the mind you cultivate is the mind you live in. And the mind you live in shapes how you meet every transition, including the final one. Rayan asked Anand after the talk, "So what happens when you die?" Anand did not give a sensational answer. He said, "What happens depends on what you have been practicing." Rayan did not like that answer at first. He wanted a clear description, like a map. Anand continued. He said, "If your mind is full of grasping, death feels like theft. If your mind is full of fear, death feels like darkness. If your mind is full of hatred, death feels like burning. But if your mind has practiced clarity, compassion, and letting go, death is not necessarily terrifying. It can be a transition met with dignity." This was not meant to blame people who fear death. It was meant to empower them. Because if practice changes your experience, then you are not helpless. Rayan began meeting in Anand weekly, not for supernatural secrets, but for inner training. And Anand taught him meditation in a simple way. Sit, feel the breath, notice thoughts, do not chase them, do not fight them, let them pass, return again and again. Rayan found it difficult. His mind wanted entertainment. It wanted certainty. It wanted to know the outcome. But slowly he began tasting a new kind of space. One evening, after a few months of practice, Rayan noticed something surprising. The thought of death still existed, but it no longer triggered the same panic. It felt more like a sober fact, like the horizon. It did not have to be feared. It had to be respected. This is one of the great paradoxes. When you stop avoiding death, you often stop being haunted by it. Avoidance gives death a monster costume. Awareness removes the costume. Now I want to walk you through a way of understanding what happens when you die that stays respectful, grounded, and useful. Not a rigid claim, but a practical lens you can test in your own life. First, there is the obvious outer fact. The body is a system. When it can no longer function, it stops. The senses stop interacting with the world in the normal way. The personality as expressed through the body can no longer perform. Second, there is the inner continuity that Buddhism points to. The mind is not only a set of ideas. It is a stream of moments shaped by habits. Even in daily life you can see this. If you practice anger for years, anger becomes fast. If you practice generosity for years, generosity becomes natural. If you practice worry for years, worry becomes automatic. You carry your practice with you like a scent. So the most important question becomes, what scent are you carrying? What habits have you strengthened? What intentions have you repeated? What attachments have you fed? Buddhism often calls this karma, not as moral punishment, but as the natural momentum of conditioned mind. You are not only living in a world, you are living in a mind, and the mind is shaped. In some Buddhist explanations, at death there can be a transition period where the momentum of the mind continues and seeks conditions for a new arising. Again, the details vary across traditions, and it is wise not to pretend certainty about what cannot be measured in the way we measure physical events. But the ethical teaching remains crystal clear. If you want a better future experience, train your mind now. If you want less fear at the end, practice letting go now. If you want to die with peace, live with peace. This is why Buddhist practice is not obsessed with death as a morbid subject. It uses death as a mirror. If death could happen at any time, how should you live today? Not with panic, but with sincerity. And Und gave Ray a practice that sounded simple but changed his life. He said every night, before sleep, imagine you might not wake up, not to frighten yourself, to bring your mind to what matters. Then ask 3 questions. What did I cling to today? What did I avoid today? What did I offer today? Rayan tried it. The first nights felt uncomfortable, but then something shifted. He noticed his priorities changing. He stopped starting arguments that did not matter. He apologized faster. He called his sister more. He stopped delaying the things he truly cared about, not because he became perfect, but because death made him honest. Now let us address something many people secretly fear. The idea of nothingness. Some fear death because they imagine it as total disappearance. Others fear it because they imagine judgment. Others fear it because they fear pain. But underneath these surface fears is often the same core fear, the fear of losing the self. Buddhist wisdom offers a radical perspective here. The self you are afraid of losing is not as solid as you think. It is a process, a pattern, a changing collection of sensations, thoughts, memories, and roles. You can test this right now. Watch your mind for 1 minute. Thoughts arise without your permission. Moods change. Attention drifts. The self is already impermanent, moment by moment. Death is not the first time impermanence happens. It is the final big expression of what has always been true. This does not mean life is meaningless. In fact, it makes life more meaningful. Because if everything is changing, then every moment of kindness matters. Every moment of awareness matters. Every moment you choose compassion over cruelty matters. This is how destiny is shaped, not by a fixed script, but by repeated intention. Rayan struggled with one thing though. He still feared separation. He feared leaving loved ones. He feared being forgotten. And unlistened and said something that sounded almost too quiet to be powerful. He said, "Love is not possession. Love is blessing." Rayan asked what that means. Anand explained, "When you love someone, you want them to be safe and happy. Possession says they must remain with you in the way you prefer. Blessing says may they be well, Even if life changes, blessing is love without clinging. This is the love that does not become suffering. Rayan realized most of his love had been mixed with clinging. He clung to his parents, his friends, his partner, not only from affection but from fear of loss. That fear created tension in relationships. It made him controlling. It made him anxious. By practicing love as blessing, he became gentler, and ironically, his relationships improved. People felt less pressured around him. They felt more seen. This is how death awareness can improve life. When you stop gripping, you stop suffocating what you love. Now let me tell you about the moment that truly transformed Rayan. His uncle passed away. It was not sudden, but it happened faster than the family expected. The family gathered. Grief filled the house like a heavy blanket. People spoke in whispers. Some argued quietly about logistics. Some cried. Some stayed numb. Rayan felt sadness, but he also felt a strange steadiness. He realized he had been practicing for this moment, not to eliminate grief, but to meet it without collapse. He sat near his uncle's body in silence for a while. He remembered the uncle laugh, the uncle's stories, the uncle flaws. He noticed his mind trying to turn the moment into a dramatic story. Why do we lose people? Why is life unfair? Why does it end? Then he remembered an unteaching. Do not add a second arrow. So he allowed the sadness. He did not fight it. He did not turn it into rage. He simply stayed present. Later, when relatives asked him why he looked calm, he said something honest. I am sad, but I do not want to waste this moment by fighting what is true. That sentence surprised even him, because it came from a different place inside him, a place that had been trained. After the funeral, Rayan sat with an and asked again, what happens when we die? Anand said, in one sense, the same thing that happens when you exhale, you release. In another sense, the mind continues according to causes. But the deepest question is not what happens after. The deepest question is what happens now. Because now is where you plant. Now is where you train. Now is where you become the kind of person who can meet whatever comes. Rayan began to see how many of his daily habits were small rehearsals for death. When he held a grudge, he was rehearsing clinging. When he forgave, he was rehearsing release. When he chased validation, he was rehearsing dependency. When he rested in awareness, he was rehearsing freedom. When he acted from greed, he was rehearsing hunger. When he acted from generosity, he was rehearsing abundance. When he reacted blindly, he was rehearsing confusion. When he paused and chose wisely, he was rehearsing awakening. This is the heart of the teaching. Nothing mystical needs to be believed for this to work. You can test it directly. Now I want to speak to you as if we are sitting together, because this topic can feel heavy. If you are feeling uneasy, that is normal. The point is not to force yourself into comfort. The point is to let discomfort teach you. Here is a simple exercise you can try that aligns with Buddhist practice and also with common human sense. Think of someone you love. Imagine they are not here forever. Notice what changes in your chest. Notice what becomes important. Maybe you want to speak more gently. Maybe you want to stop wasting time on petty fights. Maybe you want to say, thank you more often. That is death, awareness turning into love. Now think of yourself. Imagine your life is finite, because it is. Notice what becomes silly. Notice what becomes urgent. Not urgent like panicked, but urgent like truth. What would you stop doing? What would you start doing? Who would you forgive? What would you create? How would you simplify? This is not a fantasy exercise. It is a compass. Buddhist wisdom often says that remembering death is one of the most powerful ways to cut through illusion. Illusion does not mean hallucination. It means the way we forget what matters while chasing what does not. Ryan started changing his life in small ways that looked ordinary but felt profound. He began to speak more honestly but with gentleness. He began to spend less time proving himself. He began to care less about being impressive and more about being kind. He began to treat his body with respect, not vanity. He began to practice silence, even 5 minutes a day. He began to serve others in small ways without announcing it. And the more he did this, the less he feared death. Not because he found a guaranteed description of the afterlife, but because he was finally living in a way that made sense. Now, I want to address one more layer that many people ignore. The fear of death is often the fear of unresolved life, unspoken truths, unfinished apologies, unexpressed gratitude, neglected dreams, relationships left in cold distance. Buddhist practice encourages you to live with fewer loose knots. If you hurt someone, repair when you can. If you love someone, say it. If you are grateful, express it. If you carry guilt, face it with honesty and compassion and make new choices. If you carry resentment, remember that resentment is a hot coal you hold to throw at someone else. It burns you first. Ryan did something brave. He called an old friend he had drifted from after an argument. The argument was years ago. Both had been stubborn. Ryan apologized for his part. The friend was quiet, then admitted he missed him. They spoke for an hour. After the call, Ryan felt lighter, not because he won, but because he released. This is how you prepare for death in the healthiest way. You do not prepare by obsessing. You prepare by cleaning the heart. Now let me share something that often creates deep peace for people. When you understand that life is impermanent, you stop demanding perfect security. You start appreciating fragile beauty. A cup of tea becomes precious. What becomes precious. A conversation becomes precious. A quiet moment becomes precious. Not because you are trying to squeeze pleasure from everything, but because you are awake enough to see that every moment is unrepeatable. This is where awakening lives, not in grand spiritual theater, but in the ordinary made luminous by attention. So what happens when you die? Here is the most practical answer I can offer without pretending certainty about mysteries. The body ends as a functioning system. The mind meets a transition shaped by the habits it has practiced. The momentum of intention matters. Compassion and clarity reduce fear. Clinging increases fear. And the best way to prepare is to practice now. If you want a life that cannot be shaken, train equanimity. If you want a heart that can meet loss, train compassion. If you want a mind that does not panic in the unknown, train mindfulness. If you want a destiny with less suffering, plant better causes through intention and action. This is the path. Simple, not easy, but real. I want to close with something personal in tone, because this topic brings up deep feelings for many people. I have seen people who avoided death their whole lives and then felt overwhelmed when loss came. And I have seen people who gently remembered death and therefore lived with more tenderness. The second group was not gloomy. They were often more joyful because they were less distracted by nonsense. They laughed more cleanly. They loved more directly. They forgave faster. They did not postpone life. That is the gift of facing the question, not to become obsessed with endings, but to become honest about beginnings. Each day is a small beginning. Thank you for staying with me through this reflection. Now I want to hear from you. When you think about death, what feeling comes first? Fear, curiosity, sadness, peace, and what practice, belief, or experience has helped you meet impermanence with more steadiness? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and support this space by leaving a comment so these long-form teachings can continue. Until next time, breathe gently, live sincerely, and remember that the most powerful way to face death is to live awake.